Let me take you back to a morning in 399 BCE, a morning when Athens woke up divided, nervous, restless. A city still bruised from war, political chaos, and the fear of losing its identity. It is the day an old man stands trial, not for murder, not for treason, not for war crimes, but for questions, for thinking, for examining, for holding up a mirror to the city he loved. His name is Socrates. Listen closely, my friend. This is not just a trial. This is the moment philosophy itself is put on trial. Picture the scene. The Athenian court is packed. 501 jurors, ordinary citizens, crowded together on wooden benches. The sun is harsh. Dust hangs in the air. People whisper as the old philosopher walks in, calm, barefoot, unshaken. He is 70 years old. He has nothing to offer but questions. And today, those questions might cost him his life. The charges read, corrupting the youth, not believing in the gods of the city, inventing new spiritual beings. These accusations were not about crimes. They were about control. Athens, still trembling from political instability, wanted order, obedience, certainty. And Socrates? He brought discomfort. He brought doubt. He brought the painful honesty that breaks illusions open. My friend, every defendant in Athens usually begged for mercy, crying, bringing their children, wearing black robes to invoke pity. But Socrates, he stands there like a stone in a storm. No rehearsed speech, no emotional tricks, no apologies for thinking. He simply says, I will tell the truth. That's when the whole atmosphere changes, because truth in that room is more dangerous than any crime. On the surface, this is about one man, but beneath the surface, it is about the freedom to question, the courage to challenge authority, the right to examine life, the fear cities have for thinkers, the threat posed by a mind that won't obey. Socrates was not dangerous because he misled youth. He was dangerous because he awakened them. He did not corrupt Athens. He exposed it. He did not break the city. He revealed its cracks. And today, in this courtroom, Athens must decide, do we punish the man or the mirror he holds up to us? Socrates looks at 501 men who hold his fate. He knows what's coming. He knows he will not be forgiven for making people uncomfortable. He knows his honesty will cost him more than a performance ever would. Yet he stands unshaken, because for him, the real crime is not questioning authority. The real crime is living unexamined. The unexamined life is not worth living, he will tell them. Imagine saying that to the very people who can kill you. Imagine the courage. Imagine the clarity. Imagine the commitment to truth. This is why philosophers still whisper his name 2,400 years later. Not because he lived, but because of how he chose to die. My friend, this is not just history. This is the birth of Western philosophy. The moment when a man chooses integrity over survival. The moment when truth stands up against power. Take a breath. We are stepping into the courtroom now. We are taking our seat among the jurors. We will witness the accusations, the defense, the anger, the irony, the wisdom, the arrogance, the fear, the final judgment. This is the Trial of Socrates. You're listening to Wise Alchemy. Let's begin, my friend. Before we talk about the speeches, the philosophy, the dramatic tension of that Athenian courtroom, we must understand what brought Socrates there in the first place. Because the trial didn't begin on that day in 399 BCE, it began years earlier, with a man who refused to stop asking questions. This chapter isn't about guilt or innocence. It's about why a city, the birthplace of democracy, felt threatened by a single old man. Let's walk into Athens, slowly. Athens was injured. Just a few years earlier, the city had lost the Peloponnesian War. Its empire collapsed. Its pride collapsed. Its democracy was shaken, overthrown, restored, shaken again. People were grieving. People were suspicious. People needed someone to blame. And in moments like that, my friend, a society always looks for a symbol, someone to accuse, someone to silence, someone to sacrifice. Socrates became that symbol, not because he was powerful, but because he was inconvenient. Officially, Socrates was charged with corrupting the youth, not believing in the gods of the city, and introducing new spiritual ideas. But unofficially, the real charges were emotional, making powerful men look foolish, challenging tradition, exposing contradictions, refusing to flatter anyone, teaching young Athenians to question authority, being associated with men Athens hated. Socrates embarrassed politicians, poets, generals, anyone who claimed wisdom. And Athens, still wounded from war, did not want its young men hearing a voice that said, "Think for yourself." My friend, imagine a man who walks around the city asking people, what is justice? What is virtue? What is courage? What is piety? And every person he questions, leaders, scholars, craftsmen, realizes in front of a crowd that they cannot answer. Socrates didn't humiliate them intentionally, but truth tends to cut deep. And Athens was tired of being cut. So men like Miletus, Anytus, and Lycon brought formal charges. But in their hearts, the accusation was something deeper. Socrates makes us uncomfortable. And history shows, my friend, when a society becomes fragile, it punishes discomfort more than wrongdoing. Socrates had no school, no academy, no disciples lined up in rows, but the bright young minds of Athens followed him everywhere. Why? Because he didn't teach them what to think, he taught them how to think. He didn't give them answers, he gave them questions. And that scared the older generation. Athens believed young men who think too much become rebels. And they connected Socrates to those who betrayed Athens, even though Socrates himself never harmed the city. Guilt by association is powerful and dangerous. When most people face trial, they cry, beg, flatter the jury, try to gain sympathy. Socrates did none of that. He stood there, calm, firm, unshaking, as if his life did not belong to him. He said, "I will not appeal to your emotions, I will only speak the truth." And that, ironically, was the most dangerous thing he could have done. Because Athens wasn't looking for truth, Athens was looking for a man who would bow. Socrates refused to bow. Socrates is not on trial for crimes. He is on trial for integrity. He is on trial for refusing to live a life unexamined, for refusing to speak words he didn't believe, for refusing to fear death, for refusing to pretend. Athens wanted obedience. Socrates offered honesty. And that honesty is what brought him to the edge of death. This is not just a historical moment. It's the universal story of what happens when truth confronts comfort. The trial is beginning, my friend, but the real battle is not in the courtroom. It is between the soul of one man and the fear of an entire city. Before we step deeper into the trial itself, we must understand the men standing against Socrates, the voices that demanded his silence, the politicians and influencers who believed Athens could only survive if Socrates did not. Their names echo through history: Miletus, Anytus, and Lycon. On the surface, they seem ordinary. One a poet, one a powerful statesman, one a spokesman for the orators. But Apology reveals something else. They weren't simply accusing Socrates of corrupting the youth. They were accusing him of something far more dangerous: disrupting the fragile story Athens told itself. Miletus, the face of the accusation. Miletus the young poet is the official accuser, but almost everyone in Athens knew he wasn't the mastermind. He was the convenient mask. Think about it. A poet accusing a philosopher of corrupting the youth. It doesn't quite fit. But Miletus represented the frustrated traditional voice of Athens, the people who believed Socrates' constant questioning was unraveling the old values. Socrates calls him out gently in the dialogue. Doesn't this man speak nonsense? Yet Miletus wasn't foolish. He understood something crucial. If you cannot defeat Socrates with reason, attack him with fear. Anytus, the man with real power. If Miletus was the mask, Anytus was the muscle. A businessman, a politician, a war hero, a major architect of the restored democracy. And he despised Socrates. But why? Not because of religion, not because of philosophy, but because Socrates openly criticized the political leaders of Athens, including those Anytus supported. Socrates told the youth, "Do not admire these men. They only appear wise." Imagine someone telling the citizens today that the people in power are not wise, but pretending. It stings. It threatens influence. It shakes foundations. Anytus felt Socrates was dismantling the respect the government needed to survive. To him, Socrates wasn't corrupting the youth. He was empowering them to think independently. And that is dangerous in any political climate. Lycon, the voice of the orators. Lycon represented the professional speakers, the rhetoricians. Socrates had long criticized them too, calling them men who make the weaker argument appear stronger. That line alone could make an entire profession hate you. Lycon saw Socrates as a threat to the world of persuasion, performance, and political influence. Because Socrates didn't teach people to speak well, he taught them to see clearly. And clarity is poison to manipulation. My friend, Athens had just survived war, plague, political collapse, and the bloody rule of the 30 tyrants. The city was fragile. The democracy was insecure. The people were frightened. And frightened societies always look for someone to blame. Socrates became the perfect target. He questioned everything. He embarrassed powerful men. He empowered the youth. He refused to follow traditional ideology. He rejected wealth, status, and comfort. He was unpredictable, uncontrollable, unbought. In times of social instability, a man like this looks less like a philosopher and more like a threat. Apology makes it clear. Socrates was not killed for impiety. He was killed for independence. When Socrates stands in court, he's not facing 3 accusers. He's facing decades of political trauma, a city afraid of collapse, the lingering shame of losing to Sparta, wounded pride, fear of rapid change, resentment towards intellectuals, suspicion towards anyone who thinks differently. The trial was never about one man. It was about the soul of Athens. And that is what makes apology more than a legal defense. It is a confrontation between a society trying to preserve itself and a philosopher trying to awaken it. Two forces destined to collide. Trials are never only about the charges written on paper. They're about the fears written in people's hearts. And the trial of Socrates was no different. On the surface, the accusations were simple enough. 1. Corrupting the youth. 2. Not believing in the gods of the city. But to understand why Athens was ready to kill a 70-year-old philosopher who had never harmed anyone physically, we must look beneath the legal language and into the psychology of a city still trembling from war, humiliation, and political trauma. Just a few years before Socrates' trial, Athens had suffered one of the most devastating defeats in its history, the Peloponnesian War. A proud democracy had crumbled, their empire was gone, tens of thousands were dead, their economy was ruined, their faith in their own system was shaken. A city in pain often looks for someone to blame. And Socrates, he stood out. Too outspoken, too questioning, too unwilling to bow to public opinion. To a recovering, insecure democracy, a man who questioned everything felt dangerous. Not because he committed crimes, but because he exposed illusions. Athens expected its young men to become obedient citizens, loyal to the city, respectful of tradition, ready to fight when needed, believers in the old gods. But Socrates was teaching young people how to ask uncomfortable questions. And nothing threatens authority more than a generation that thinks for itself. Aristophanes, years before the trial, mocked Socrates in the play The Clouds, portraying him as a floating, head-in-the-air sophist who teaches boys how to overthrow tradition. This comedy shaped public perception. And by the time of the trial, many Athenians believed that Socrates was corrupting the youth not with violence or rebellion, but with philosophy. Imagine that, being on trial for encouraging young people to think. Now, my friend, here is where the case becomes even more interesting. Socrates never denied the existence of gods. In fact, in the Apology, he argues that he is guided by a divine sign, his daimonion. So why accuse him of atheism? Because in ancient Athens, not believing in the gods of the city did not mean literal atheism. It meant you do not respect our traditions, our values, our civic identity. After the political chaos Athens endured, the tyranny of the 30, the civil conflict, the broken democracy, the city was desperate for unity, and Socrates was a symbol of nonconformity. Not submissive, not fearful, not easy to control. A man who refuses to bow to social pressure is terrifying to a fragile democracy. So they reframed philosophy as impiety. There was something else, something people rarely admit. Some of Socrates' students became powerful and dangerous. Two notorious names: Critias, leader of the 30 tyrants; Alcibiades, brilliant but reckless general who betrayed Athens more than once. Even though Socrates was not responsible for their political choices, Athens associated him with their chaos. It's unfair, but politically convenient. And in times of crisis, societies prefer convenient truths over accurate ones. Socrates is not just being judged as a man, he's being judged as a symbol of questioning, a symbol of disobedience, a symbol of intellectual independence, a symbol of a painful past Athens wished to erase. Socrates believed thinking makes a society stronger. Athens believed unity makes a society safer. Two visions of the world collided in that courtroom, and only one would survive. If accusing Socrates of impiety was serious, accusing him of corrupting the youth was far worse. Because this charge didn't attack his beliefs, it attacked his influence. Athens could tolerate strange ideas, but influencing young minds, that was dangerous. And Socrates knew it. In ancient Athens, the future of the city lived in its youth. Young men would become soldiers, lawmakers, judges, leaders. To say Socrates was corrupting them was to say, this man is poisoning the future of Athens. This wasn't about philosophy anymore. This was about power. Who gets to shape the next generation? Instead of defending himself emotionally, Socrates does something unexpected. He interrogates his accuser. He asks Meletus, "Do you believe I corrupt the youth intentionally or unintentionally?" Because either answer traps the accusation. If Socrates corrupts them unintentionally, then he deserves education, not punishment. If he corrupts them intentionally, then he would be harming those he lives among, which makes no sense for a rational man. Socrates is dismantling the charge without raising his voice. Then Socrates asks a deeper question. If I corrupt the youth, who improves them? Meletus answers vaguely, the laws, the judges, the citizens. Socrates presses harder. So everyone improves the youth, and only I corrupt them? My friend, this is courtroom philosophy at its sharpest. Socrates exposes the absurdity. No evidence, no examples, no students testifying against him, no proof of harm. Only fear. We all know Socrates wasn't corrupting the youth. He was teaching them to question authority, challenge tradition, detect false wisdom, think independently. And that terrified the powerful. Young people followed Socrates because he didn't give answers. He taught them how to think. A society can survive bad ideas, but it struggles to survive independent thinkers. At this moment, Socrates could have softened. He could have said, "I'll stop teaching, I'll stay quiet, I'll change." But he doesn't. He says something radical. If I am corrupting the youth by teaching them to think, then I will continue to do so. Because to stop would be worse than death. This is where the trial stops being legal and becomes moral. My friend, this isn't about ancient Athens. It's about a timeless question. Should truth be silenced when it makes people uncomfortable? Socrates believed a society that fears its thinkers is already corrupt, and a generation taught not to question is already lost. The room is silent now. Not the silence of respect, but the silence of judgment. Socrates has finished his opening words, not a defense, not a plea, just a refusal to fear. And now, the trial truly begins. This is the moment when the accusations are no longer rumors, no longer whispers, no longer shadows following him through Athens. They are spoken out loud, before the court, before the city, before history. Meletus steps forward. He is young, confident, certain that the law is on his side. He accuses Socrates of two crimes. 1. Corrupting the youth of Athens. 2. Not believing in the gods of the city, but introducing new divine things. These are not small accusations. In Athens, corrupting the youth means destroying the future of the city. And impiety, disbelief in the gods, is not just religious crime. It is political danger. Because the gods protect the laws. To challenge them is to challenge the city itself. This is why the room tightens. This is why the jury leans forward. Most men would now defend themselves emotionally. They would cry, beg, swear loyalty, name witnesses, attack the accuser. Socrates does none of that. Instead, he questions Meletus, not angrily, not sarcastically, but calmly, like a teacher in a public lesson. And this is where the trial changes direction, because Socrates does not argue innocence. He exposes confusion. Socrates asks, "Do I corrupt the youth intentionally or unintentionally?" Meletus answers, "Intentionally." And Socrates smiles, gently, because this answer destroys the accusation. Socrates explains, "If I intentionally corrupt the youth, I would be surrounded by corrupted citizens, and corrupted citizens harm others. Why would I knowingly harm myself? If I corrupt them unintentionally, then the law says I should be taught, not punished." The courtroom shifts. Some jurors frown, some exchange looks. This is not how trials usually go. Socrates is not fighting, he is thinking aloud. Then Socrates turns to the second charge. "You say I do not believe in the gods," he asks, "yet you also say I introduce new divine things." He pauses. How can someone believe in divine activities without believing in divine beings? It's a simple question, and it exposes a contradiction. You cannot accuse a man of atheism and divine belief at the same time. The logic hangs in the air, uncomfortable, sharp, undeniable. And here, quietly, this is where Plato enters the story, not as a speaker, not as a defender, but as a witness. Plato is present in the court, young, listening, watching his teacher dismantle accusations without anger, without fear. Years later, Plato will write this moment down, not to glorify Socrates, but to preserve the method. Because this is not just a trial, it is philosophy standing naked before power. This is not about guilt or innocence, it shows something deeper. Athens is not judging Socrates for crimes, it is judging him for making people uncomfortable, for exposing false confidence, for embarrassing authority, for questioning what everyone else accepts. And the jury knows it. They may not admit it, but they feel it. The accusations have been spoken, the contradictions have been exposed, but now comes the most dangerous part of the trial. Socrates will explain why he does this at all, why he questions, why he refuses silence, why he believes this life is worth risking death. My friend, this is the moment where the story quietly changes. Until now, Socrates has been speaking alone, defending himself with reason, irony, and truth. But now, Plato enters the story, not as a speaker, not as a hero, as a witness. And that matters more than it seems. Plato is sitting in the courtroom. He is young. He is watching his teacher, calm, ironic, and unafraid, stand in front of a jury that may sentence him to death. And here's the important thing. Plato does not dramatize Socrates. He does not exaggerate emotion. He does not turn this into a legend. Because apology is not philosophy fiction. It is a courtroom document. Plato is saying to history, "This is what was said. This is how it happened. Judge for yourself." This makes everything heavier. Up to this point, the trial could be dismissed as myth, but Plato's presence changes that, because Plato later becomes the founder of Western philosophy, the teacher of Aristotle, the architect of rational thought. And he is telling us, "I was there. I heard these words. This is not a metaphor." The execution of Socrates is no longer just a tragedy. It becomes a historical fracture. Plato notices something disturbing. Socrates is not trying to win. He refuses emotional appeals. He refuses to beg. He refuses to bring his family to gain sympathy. Instead, he speaks like a man who knows the verdict is already decided. Socrates is no longer arguing for his life. He is arguing for truth itself. Plato realizes this in real time, and this is where philosophy is born. Not in books, not in theories, but in a courtroom where truth is losing to power. Imagine being Plato in that moment. You believe Athens is the center of wisdom. You believe democracy is justice. You believe reason will protect the innocent. And then you watch the wisest man you know be treated like a criminal for asking questions. This is the moment Plato understands something terrifying. A society can kill truth while believing it is doing justice. That realization never leaves him. Every book Plato writes later is shaped by this day. Plato is not trying to save Socrates. It's too late. He is trying to save philosophy. By preserving Socrates' words, Plato is saying, even if you kill the man, you will not kill the questions. Apology is not a defense of Socrates. It is an accusation against ignorance disguised as law. From this point on, the trial feels different. The jury is still listening, but the real audience has changed. Socrates is now speaking to future generations, thinkers, students, anyone who values truth over comfort. And Plato is the bridge. The student becomes the messenger. Socrates is about to face the verdict, but before the sentence is delivered, he will say something so radical, so dangerous, that it guarantees his death. The courtroom falls quiet. After hours of accusation, defense, and cross-examination, the moment finally arrives. The jury has decided. Socrates stands still as the votes are counted, not with fear, not with anger, but with a strange calm that unsettles everyone watching. And then the verdict is announced. Guilty. Not unanimously, the vote is close, very close. Only a small margin separates life from death. Socrates notices this immediately. He does not panic, he does not beg. Instead, he does something extraordinary. He analyzes the vote. Socrates tells the court something shocking. If only 30 votes had gone the other way, I would have been acquitted. This matters, because it means many jurors were not convinced by the accusations, and Socrates knows it. He understands something deeply human here. The court is unsure. The city is divided. The verdict is fragile. And yet, instead of softening his tone to win sympathy, Socrates becomes even more honest, even more unyielding. This is where most people would change strategy. Socrates does the opposite. In Athenian courts, after a guilty verdict, the accused is allowed to propose an alternative punishment. This is the moment where men cry, bring their children forward, beg the jury for mercy, promise silence, promise obedience. Socrates refuses all of it. He says clearly, I will not do what others do. I will not beg you. Why? Because to him, begging would mean admitting guilt, and Socrates refuses to live a lie just to stay alive. Then comes the most misunderstood moment of the entire trial. Socrates asks himself aloud, what punishment do I deserve? And his answer shocks the room. He says, I deserve to be rewarded. Specifically, free meals for life at the Prytaneum, the highest honor Athens gives its heroes. The courtroom erupts. To the jury, this sounds like arrogance, mockery, insult. But Socrates is not joking. He truly believes that by questioning citizens, exposing false wisdom, and pushing people toward virtue, he has served Athens more than generals or athletes. And in his moral framework, a man who improves souls deserves honor, not punishment. This proposal changes everything. Up to now, some jurors were uncertain. Now, many feel insulted. Not because Socrates argued badly, but because he refused to submit. He would rather die than pretend he was wrong. Eventually, pressured by friends, he offers a fine. But it is too late. The damage is done. The court moves to the final vote. This time, the margin is not close. The jury votes for death. And here's the part that matters most, my friend. Socrates is not surprised. He expected this. He even explains why. Because people can forgive ignorance, but they cannot forgive someone who exposes their moral comfort as a lie. Socrates didn't lose because he was wrong. He lost because he refused to stop being Socrates. The trial is no longer about impiety, corrupting youth, legal accusations. It becomes about something deeper. Can a society tolerate a man who tells the truth without fear? Athens answers, no. And Socrates accepts that answer without hatred, without bitterness, without regret.
By now, the courtroom is tense. Socrates has spoken boldly. He has refused to beg. He has dismantled his accusers without apologizing. And now, something important happens. For the first time in the trial, we are reminded that Socrates is not alone. The court begins to notice the people sitting behind him. Young men, former students, listeners, thinkers. Among them is one name that history will never forget: Plato. Plato does not rise to defend Socrates. He does not interrupt the court. He does not challenge the jury. But his presence is recorded. Why? Because this trial is not just about Socrates anymore. It is about what he created. Ideas do not stand trial alone. They bring witnesses. And Socrates' witnesses are his students. Men who listened. Men who questioned. Men who learned how to think instead of obey. This is exactly what Athens fears. The charges were never really about impiety, corrupting youth, disrespecting gods. Those were legal tools. The real fear is this: Socrates taught people to question authority without violence. That is more dangerous than rebellion. A man with a sword can be killed. A man with an idea multiplies. Plato represents that multiplication. Every student present is proof that Socrates' voice did not end with him. Look at the room carefully. On one side, judges, elders, politicians, respected citizens. On the other, students, thinkers, young men, future philosophers. This is not just a trial. It is a collision between generations. Athens is judging its own future, and it does not like what it sees. Socrates understands something deeply. No student can save him. No testimony will soften the jury. The moment Athens decided that questioning tradition was dangerous, the verdict became inevitable. That is why Socrates does not turn to Plato. He does not ask his students to defend him, because if they speak, they confirm the accusation. This is subtle but powerful. By standing alone, Socrates protects his students. If he turns the trial into a movement, they become targets. So he absorbs the punishment himself. One man, one voice, one conscience. He chooses isolation over survival. This is not pride. This is responsibility. At this moment, the jury is no longer deciding facts. They are deciding a message. If Socrates lives, questioning lives. If Socrates dies, Athens restores control. Plato understands this, and this moment will shape everything he later writes. Not philosophy first, memory first. From individual defense to historical consequence, Socrates is no longer just a defendant. He is becoming a symbol, and symbols are dangerous to governments. By now, something strange has happened in the courtroom. Socrates is the one standing before the judges. But slowly, quietly, the roles have begun to reverse. Because as the trial goes on, it's no longer clear who is actually on trial. Is it Socrates? Or is it Athens itself? Socrates does something dangerous here, something no defendant is supposed to do. He questions authority itself. He looks at the jury, citizens, officials, men of status, and asks, in essence, do you value truth or do you value comfort? This is not a legal question. This is a political one. Because a society that kills a man for questioning it is revealing its own fear. My friend, notice something important. Socrates is not accused of theft, not violence, not treason. He is accused of corrupting minds, asking dangerous questions, weakening respect for authority. Throughout history, these are always the crimes that power fears the most. Not rebellion with weapons, but rebellion with thought. Socrates exposes this without shouting, without attacking. He simply keeps asking, what is virtue? What is justice? What is wisdom? And the court has no clear answers. Imagine the room. A man who refuses to beg, a man who refuses to flatter, a man who refuses to fear death. What do you do with someone like that? You can't shame him, you can't scare him, you can't buy him. And that terrifies power. Because authority depends on obedience, and obedience depends on fear. Socrates has none. Here, Socrates delivers one of the most dangerous ideas ever spoken in a court. It is better to suffer injustice than to commit it. Think about that. If people truly believed this, how many systems would collapse? How many lies would stop working? Socrates is showing that the law, when driven by fear of disruption, stops being justice and becomes self-protection. And suddenly, Athens doesn't look like the judge anymore. It looks like the accused. My friend, this is the heart of Plato's apology. The book is not asking, is Socrates guilty? It is asking, what happens when truth challenges power? What happens when philosophy refuses to kneel? What happens when a society prefers order over wisdom? Socrates is holding up a mirror, and Athens doesn't like what it sees. Let's be honest, Socrates' real crime was not corrupting youth. His real crime was this: he made people uncomfortable with themselves. He exposed false confidence. He exposed borrowed beliefs. He exposed authority without wisdom. And societies rarely forgive those who expose their foundations. Socrates has been found guilty, not by a mob, not by a tyrant, but by a legal vote of the Athenian jury. Let that sit for a second. A city that prides itself on wisdom has just declared its wisest man a criminal. Now comes the most revealing moment of the entire trial. The moment when Socrates is asked a question that exposes what Athens truly values. Under Athenian law, once guilt is decided, both sides must propose a punishment. The accusers demand death. Now the court turns to Socrates and asks, "What punishment do you propose for yourself?" This is the moment where most men beg. This is where apologies are expected. This is where tears usually flow. But Socrates does something that shocks the room. Socrates pauses, then calmly says, "What do I deserve? Not what should I accept, not what will save my life. What do I deserve?" And then he answers his own question. I deserve to be fed for free at the Prytaneum. The Prytaneum was a sacred hall. Only Olympic champions and great benefactors of Athens were honored there. Socrates is saying something radical. I have served this city my entire life. I made you question yourselves. I made you better. That deserves honor, not punishment. This wasn't arrogance. It was a mirror. And Athens did not like what it saw. At this moment, Socrates isn't mocking the court. He is exposing the truth. Athens claims to love virtue, but rewards comfort. Athens claims to love wisdom, but punishes questioning. Athens claims to love freedom, but fears a free mind. By refusing to grovel, Socrates proves the charge against him was never really about impiety. It was about disobedience. Seeing the anger rising, Socrates does offer an alternative. A small fine, not as an admission of guilt, but as a legal formality. His friends, including Plato, offer it to pay it. This is important, my friend. Socrates is not reckless. He understands the system, but he refuses to lie just to survive. Socrates believes a good life is more important than a long life. He believes that once you abandon truth to save yourself, you've already lost. And Athens now faces a choice: punish a man who refuses to flatter power, or admit that the city itself cannot tolerate genuine philosophy. We know which choice they make.
The jury has done what many expected. They have found Socrates guilty. Not unanimously, but guilty enough. The courtroom is quiet again. And now comes the second phase of the trial. Not guilt, but punishment. In Athens, the law works like this. The accusers propose a punishment. Then the accused proposes an alternative, and the jury chooses between them. Miletus and his allies propose the obvious: death, poison, hemlock, an end. All eyes turn to Socrates. This is the moment when most men beg, when voices soften, when fear enters the room. But Socrates does something no one expects. He doesn't beg. He doesn't apologize. He doesn't plead for mercy. He asks a question instead. Socrates stands and says calmly, "What punishment do I deserve for spending my life urging Athenians to care for virtue, truth, and the state of their souls?" And then, almost mockingly, almost playfully, he answers his own question. He says, "I deserve free meals for life at the Prytaneum." That was an honor reserved for Olympic champions and great benefactors of Athens. The courtroom reacts. Some laugh in disbelief, some grow furious, some feel insulted. But Socrates is not joking. He is deadly serious. He is saying, "I have not harmed Athens. I have served it." This is not arrogance. This is moral defiance. At this moment, Socrates could save himself. He could propose exile. He could propose silence. He could propose a fine large enough to satisfy the jury. And eventually, under pressure from his friends, he does offer a fine. But even then, he makes something clear. He will not say what he does not believe. He will not pretend guilt. He will not promise to stop questioning, because to do so would be worse than death. This is one of the most radical ideas in the book. For Socrates, living unjustly is worse than dying unjustly. A long life without truth is not a gift. It is a punishment. The jury now has two options: death, a fine proposed by a man who refuses to admit wrongdoing. The vote is taken again. This time, more jurors vote for death than before. Socrates has not persuaded them. He has provoked them. And yet, he remains calm, almost relieved. This chapter is not about arrogance. It's about a collision between two worlds, a society that demands obedience, and a man who believes conscience outranks law. Socrates is not trying to win. He is trying to remain consistent. To him, a life spent contradicting himself to avoid pain is already a form of death. And so, without shouting, without drama, without fear, he accepts the direction things are moving. The sentence is approaching. The hemlock has not yet been poured, but its shadow is now in the room. In the final chapter, Socrates will do something extraordinary. He will speak not to defend himself, not to argue law, but to address death itself. And what he says there will echo for over 2,000 years. By now, the words have been spoken. The accusations have been heard. The defense has been delivered. The jury has listened. Now comes the moment every trial leads to: the verdict. And this is where history stops being a courtroom record and becomes a philosophical earthquake. In Athens, verdicts were not dramatic speeches. They were silent stones dropped into urns. One stone for guilt, one stone for innocence. No debate, no explanation, just judgment. When the count was finished, the result was close, painfully close. Socrates was found guilty by a narrow margin, not unanimously, not decisively, just enough. That matters, because it means Athens was unsure, and uncertainty, when mixed with fear, often chooses punishment. In Athenian law, after guilt came something strange. The accused could propose his own punishment. This was the moment for apology, for compromise, for survival. Everyone expected Socrates to suggest exile, or a fine, or silence. This was the moment he could have walked free. Instead, Socrates did something no one expected. He smiled and said, "What do I deserve? I deserve to be fed at the Prytaneum like an Olympic champion." The court froze, not because he was arrogant, but because he refused to pretend guilt. He would not negotiate with a lie. Here is the core of apology, my friend. Socrates believed something radical, that living unjustly is worse than dying. He told the jury, "If you kill me, you will harm yourselves more than you harm me." Not a threat, a diagnosis. He explained that a life without questioning, without truth, without moral examination was not worth preserving, even if it continued. This is why he would not beg, because begging would teach his students that survival matters more than integrity, and Socrates would not corrupt them, even to save his own life. After his refusal to play the game, the second vote came. This time, the margin widened. The punishment chosen: death by hemlock. Quiet, legal, final. And yet, Socrates showed no fear, no shaking voice, no regret, only clarity. Before leaving the court, he spoke one last time, not to defend himself, but to warn Athens. He said, "You think killing me will free you from criticism, but more will come, younger, sharper, less gentle."
Oh, my friend, history proved him right. They killed a man, but awakened philosophy. They silenced a voice, but amplified an idea. This was never about gods, never about corruption. It was about this. Can a society tolerate someone who forces it to examine itself? Athens answered no. History answered yes. Because Socrates' trial didn't end in death. It began a tradition. Questioning authority, valuing conscience over law, choosing truth over comfort, defending speech without flattery. Every philosopher after him walked through that courtroom, including Plato. My friend, apology is not a story about losing a trial. It is a story about winning a moral argument at the cost of life itself. Socrates did not ask to be remembered, but by refusing to betray truth, he became unforgettable. And the question he left behind still waits for an answer. Is it better to live comfortably in error or to die standing in truth? That question is the real verdict. The courtroom closes, the jury disperses, the city moves on, but the echo remains. And that's it for today, my friend. You were listening to Wise Alchemy. The story ends here for now, but you and I will meet again. Thank you.